Hi, I'm Ben Binkley, and I live in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm the first pastor of Hilldale Methodist Church and came here in the fall of 1954 and left here in the fall of 1956. But I came empty-handed and went away full because I met my first wife here. She was a member of this congregation, and she was a widow with a really delightful son named Artie Manning. Her name was Elizabeth Manning Sawyer. She was Elizabeth Sawyer Manning, I should say. But she and Artie were members of this congregation when it was first formed, and so before I left here, we were married, and I took Liz and Artie with me when we went from here to another congregation in Tennessee.
What did you do before you came here?
I was a full-time pastor at Belmont Methodist Church in Nashville before I came here. It was about a year and a half that I was there. After I graduated from seminary at Emory University in Atlanta, I went to Candler School of Theology on the recommendation of my pastor, Pastor Pennington, Dr. Pennington, at East End Methodist Church, who was my pastor. And he recommended that I go to Emory. When I told him what kind of a relationship the Lord and I had come to. And so that was where I went, and I enjoyed it very much.
Where are you from?
I'm from Nashville. I'm a native of Nashville, and grew up there in East Nashville, graduate of East Nashville High School, lived a few blocks from my grandparents where my father had grown up, and his father had grown up in Nashville, and my great-grandfather, after whom I was named, Benjamin Franklin Binkley, he lived in Nashville, of course, as well. And so I'm a Tennessean, a volunteer, and I treasure my Tennessee heritage and my Nashville heritage and my East Nashville heritage as well.
Is your middle name Franklin?
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha.
I'm Benjamin Franklin.
So tell us about coming here in the very beginning of this church, the first Sunday and all that.
Well, we're talking about a long time ago, and I do remember coming here. And I do remember also coming and as a single pastor, having no family, and looking for a place to live. And when I first came, I was invited by the Cloud family, Bill and Martha Cloud, to come to their home and stay with them. And so I moved in to their home, to the upstairs room where their sons lived. And so we had good times upstairs together. And so the first Sunday was a Sunday that was preceded by quite a bit of work. We had to find a place to meet, and we found this Moore School. Moore Elementary School was not far away, and they welcomed us in. We used the auditorium there, and they let us store the things that we needed for pulpit and organ, I think. We may have had a portable organ. But we stored those from Sunday to Sunday and went there, held services there for quite some time until we could build, till the church could build a building like the one that we're in here now, which was the building part of the building that was constructed after things got together and people got to work.
So, what was that first Sunday like? What do you remember about that first Sunday?
Not much. I'm sure I was pleased with the congregation, which was substantial for a newly formed congregation. We had already had 54 people who had signed up as charter members of this new congregation. Most of them came from Madison Street Methodist, and of course Madison Street had been a great help in getting, they had done a major fundraiser for themselves and also for this congregation to start. And so the congregation started out with, I think, a $50,000, you might say, endowment to begin things with, and also with a congregation of about 54 who were committed to this congregation's life. And some really gifted and wonderful people who were part of this original congregation.
When was this land purchased?
I just read recently that this land was not purchased until after the congregation began to meet at Moore School. Then they began to look. We formed committees, to organize so that we could function as a church. And there was a committee, a building committee, I think, that found this land available, and then the decision was made to purchase it. And after that, the next thing was to build a building. And as I look back, I think what an enormous undertaking that congregation had and what great faith they had, because that congregation undertook to build a $125,000 building with a 30-year mortgage. And that enabled them then to start construction. They didn't have any problem that I recall getting a bank to loan them the money so they could build. And then they, got a local architect to design the facility, and construction began not too long after we began to be a congregation here.
What do you remember about that building process? What do you remember? Any stories about this going up or that going up? Or
I can't.
Trips up here to look at it?
I can't say I can remember anything particular, except that I know I was out regularly to look at it, to see how how things were going along, and I felt like they were moving along well. I didn't have any concern about any particular aspect of the way it was going up. We built a style which I thought was really a good design, and still I think is contemporary. Although it's now 60 years old, approximately. And so, of course, that means I'm a little older than that.
What was the first Sunday like coming into the sanctuary?
That's a difficult question, because I don't have any specific memories of that first service, of that first time that we came together. I suspect I was I had some tension in my spirit as far as being the new pastor of the first gathering of the new congregation. And
I'm referring to when you walked into this room for the first time for the first worship service.
You mean this room or
this room?
Oh, this room. Oh, well, I would have to say we were mostly happy. I was really happy with the way it looked and with the facility that we had. We had organ. We had everything, pulpit, altar, everything that we needed to function really well as a congregation, worshiping congregation. And I don't recall any complaints. If there were any, they didn't come to me.
No, go ahead. That's yours.
I want to go back a little bit, if I can, to what you said at first about you came here after being at Belmont for about a year.
Mm-hmm.
So you were fresh out of seminary, and
To Belmont.
yeah, fresh out of Belmont, right?
Mm-hmm.
You were about, what, 25 years old or so?
Well, I went to seminary at the age of 21 and finished there at the age of 24. So that's when I went to Belmont, and I was there for a year and a half, and probably came here when I was 25, before I turned 26.
Okay. I'm not criticizing anybody in the church leadership, but what did you think when they came to you and said, we want you, brand new, young, to go down to Clarksville or up to Clarksville and start a church from the ground up? How did you feel about that challenge?
I was a little surprised because I had only been at Belmont a year and a half, and as I look back, I see it now. It was a more like an internship for me, but at the time I didn't think of it that way, and I was a little surprised that I was leaving Belmont so soon, and also that I was coming to start a new congregation since I had very little experience pastoring. That was it. It was a form of compliment, really, which, I can see as I look back. But at the time, I was a little more perplexed than anything.
It does look. I mean, you look back on it and you see a lot of different thought processes. You are young, you are energetic, you are intelligent, you are just what Hilldale needed. But, and I have to say, they were probably in tune enough with the Spirit to know that, because a lot of people probably wouldn't have thought about sending someone with very little.
Yeah, they were very welcoming. The whole congregation, and those that took leadership positions in the early life of the congregation, they were men like Dr. George Grice, who was a university professor of English at Austin Peay, and had been at Western Kentucky University before he came to Austin Peay. I believe that's right. And he and his wife Marion, they were experienced church people, experienced in the life of the church themselves. And then there was many others, Wilson Goodrich and Alice Wilson had been, and they had been active at Madison Street, Guilford Atkins and Irene, and then Guilford's, I think it was Guilford's mother, Mrs. Atkins. They were all experienced, they all had more experience in the church than I did. But they didn't make that an issue. They welcomed me. They made me feel at home here, and although I felt my youth, I showed you that picture earlier of the black horn-rimmed glasses that I purchased in order to look a little older. So that was a sign of my feeling of being really young in the midst of, really a lot of experienced people and experienced churchmen who knew a lot about church life and who had functioned well in the church at Madison Street. And but they were most welcoming to me, and I really did feel at home here.
Well, I think you were just what was needed, and I think that was a definite plus.
Thank you.
I've read a lot of things in the history, so I'm really excited about meeting you. There was something that was in one of let me back up again. The people, the membership, seemed to understand that they were doing something very important.
Mm-hmm.
And they kept incredible records,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm now
Looking over.
Looking over and enjoying so much.
Mm-hmm.
Minutes from some of the meetings. There was one board meeting where you're quoted. And it's such an interesting thing that you said. You told the membership that they didn't need to rely on you as much as they were relying on you, that they needed to make decisions themselves. And I thought how wise that was for you to say that. I don't know what the circumstances were or anything. Don't know if you even remember that. But there was such wisdom in that one sentence. And, you know, it was just typical of all the things I've read.
Thank you. I don't remember that incident with the board, but I do recall that my theology of the church was really that every member is a priest unto God, and that we are all called of God, every one of us, and that there were people in this congregation. I knew then there were people in this congregation who knew far more than I did, you know, about how to do things, a lot of things. Seminary education was a great experience for me, but what I felt about it was, this is what every Christian should learn about his faith. It was like, oh, I just finished my Sunday school education when I went to seminary. That was the kind of the attitude I had about it even then when I was going through it. And that fed into the way I thought we should be working together as a congregation. There were some things I was authorized to do that everybody was not authorized to do, as far as the leadership of the church was concerned. But there were a lot of things that I had no knowledge of that others in the congregation knew a lot about, and we needed what everyone could give in terms of their own knowledge and input to the life of this new congregation. And we formed 4 committees. There was committee on evangelism, committee on education, maybe one on church membership, and there was one more. I'm not sure what the other one was, but we had really excellent leaders for those committees, and they gave leadership. I didn't have to tell them what to do. I met with them to give in to input to anything I could add to what they were already envisioning and working at. But they were capable leaders, and that was one of the reasons I think the congregation grew in that first 2 years that I was a part of the leadership here. We grew from that 54 members to 200 members. And on one occasion, the pastor at Madison Street came out for a personal visit with me. And I had some of the people, of course, the first 54 members, most of them came from Madison Street, and then other members who lived in the area and found out that there was a congregation here and that they thought they might like to be a part of it after something had started. Then they came to join Hilldale. There was one occasion when the pastor at Madison Street came out to talk with me about sheep stealing, because it felt to him like I was stealing some of his sheep, and as I look back, I can understand that, because there were a lot of people leaving Madison Street to come to Hilldale, and that wasn't the only place they were leaving. They were leaving, was it Forest Street? That was the only other Methodist congregation right in Clarksville, but until Hilldale was formed. But mostly they were coming from Madison Street, those who were already members of the Methodist Church.
Okay, Artie has told some secrets about you. He tells us that you sang
Oh, yes.
and that you would move from the pulpit into the choir when it came time for the choir to sing. And that you were, why don't you tell us about your singing?
Well, I have been a singer all my life. My father loved to sing. He had a trained voice, and he sang in the church I grew up in, and also before that I learned that he had been a paid tenor soloist in a couple of the congregations in Nashville when he was younger. But he just sang all the time, sang around the house. We had an old piano, and when I was old enough, I got a few lessons. And my grandmother lived with us, and she had played for her. Her father had been a Methodist pastor. And so she used to play, when she was young, she used to play for some of the services herself. And she would get on that old piano and play. So there was a lot of music in my home, and I grew up loving music and loving especially the music of the church. And so I was able to be a part of the East High Ensemble when I was at East High School. And then when I went to Vanderbilt, I was a part of the Vanderbilt a cappella choir. I was business manager in my junior year and president in my senior year at Vanderbilt. I was really committed to that choir and enjoyed it immensely. And so whenever I could sing, I took the opportunity. And I didn't do too much of that joining of the choir here because I began to feel like it's going to look to people like you think nothing can function if you're not in the middle of it. And I didn't want that impression created. So I don't think I sang with the choir for very long. But my heart was always with the music of the church, and still is.
So you won't object to singing when you come back to see us in August?
I would not ever object to singing.
I've already told the choir director.
Okay, wonderful.
Yay.
Yeah.
Okay, wait. What about the Ambassadors Quartet? Was that while you were here, or was that later?
The Ambassadors were later. I was interested in reading that history because that was after I left. If I had been around, I might have formed it if I'd been here long enough, and I would certainly have wanted to sing in it. When I was in high school, we formed a quartet called the Greengrass Boys. And when I was in college, we formed a quartet called the Great Scots. And in seminary, we formed a quartet called the Southern Stylists. We were in Atlanta, and we were getting cool. So we had the Southern Stylists. But I was experienced in quartet singing, and have always enjoyed it. And so if there was an Ambassadors Quartet, if I had been here, I'd have been hard put not to be a part of it.
Well, we're going to be trying to revive that.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
Lovely male voices in this.
Good.
So get ready. Artie also said that you're a very organized person and that you keep records
from the past.
Pastors.
Yes. I was surprised to find that I have all the sermons I preached at Hilldale in my old file. And when you asked what the first sermon was, I mean, you had it on the bulletin, but I also have notes that I used to preach that sermon called True Wisdom.
Do you remember the motivation for that topic, that sermon? Does it?
Only that I think all of us are like children before our Heavenly Father, and that I'm still there. You know, I'm a few years older, but I'm still there, and that true wisdom comes from Him, and all of us need to look to Him for wisdom, rather than trust in ourselves, as we are often tend to do.
2 years here, do you have memories of successes? Do you have memories of frustrations? Because that's a part of our daily lives.
Yeah.
Do you remember any of those things specifically?
Mostly, it seemed to me like all was going really well. I really don't have anything that sticks strongly in my memory as something that was not going well. I did realize before I left that we had put ourselves the congregation had put itself in a difficult place by undertaking a mortgage large enough to build a $125,000 building. Because what that did what tended to do was to put us in the position of seeking money more than the Lord. And that's destructive to the life of the body of Christ. And I realized that before I left, although it was kind of part of the scene, part of what felt like we needed to do to build a nice building, and yet it put us in a really difficult place in some respects, in terms of having a bigger budget to meet than we might have had resources for.
There are dwindling numbers of charter members still with us.
Yes, I heard about Brother Robert C., who was one of the charter members, and he just went to be with the Lord this past week.
Oh, that was 3 years ago. This is his wife, his second wife, who died.
Oh, it's his second wife who died. Oh.
He died 3 years ago.
He did. Oh, I got that mistaken.
But Margaret Bill just died.
Yes, Margaret. Yes, she was one of the original.
And by our count, there are 5 or 6. We're not sure about one person still in this congregation that were charter members. There are probably 5 others still living members that are not here at Hilldale.
Elsewhere.
Do you maintain any contact with any of the original?
I do not. I do not. Part of my instruction as a pastor in the Methodist Church was, when you leave, don't go back. You know.
Still the instruction.
And then another part of it was that you don't make friends in a congregation. You be friendly, but don't make friends. And at least if that's not what I was taught, that's what I got. That's what I thought I was taught. And as I look back over the years, there were people who became friends of mine, and I just haven't kept up with them. There were a lot of people that I really felt close to, and I got to know well, and I thought it was appropriate that a pastor have close relationships in a congregation. As long as he doesn't sort of single those out all the time and not have time for anybody else, that's not a good pastoral position. But yeah.
You did marry one.
I did marry one, yes, and took her with me, and took Artie too. I have to tell you, I think Artie may have told you this story when you were talking with him, but when I made my first pastoral call on his mom, Liz, I called her Liz, and Artie, I just made a pastoral call, went in and got acquainted, and I got up to leave, and as I was getting ready to walk out, Artie came up. He was this really cute bright 6-year-old, and he came up to me and said, why don't you marry my mom? And I don't know what I told him. Do you remember what I said? What?
Mother screamed from the kitchen too loud. I think you exited your
I didn't hear him.
Liz screamed too loud.
Oh, she covered up your response. Well, I don't remember what I responded, but I did marry his mom. And she was a very attractive young widow whose first husband, Artie's father, had died in Korea in a prisoner of war camp. And I've always felt that I had the privilege of being father to Artie when his father couldn't father him.
Now, you finished your career as an Episcopal priest.
Yes.
This is not church history. This
But
is
go
this
ahead,
is
Nell.
my this
What
is,
happened? What's happened to you since you were here? Just briefly, what's
Okay.
happened to you since you were here? After you left here, you went to Waynesboro.
Waynesboro, yes, I was there for...
Waynesboro, you went to the Episcopal Church.
That's right. I was in Waynesboro and went into the Episcopal Church. There were a number of reasons why I decided to make a change. And the first decision I made was I need to make a change. And then secondly, I had to find where that change would be to, where I would move to, or what, other denomination I might work in. But after being married and having a school student in my family immediately, I realized that the frequent moves that I had anticipated in the Methodist Church would put the child at some disadvantage in having to change friends and school environments quite often compared to what I experienced, because I grew up in the same town, went to the same school my father went to, had one of the same teachers that my mother had when I was in elementary school. I mean, there was this long, ongoing family connection in one place. And so part of what affected me was the realization that Artie would be having to move from one school to another with some frequency. There were some other things that affected me that made me decide that I should make a change. And I called my best friend, who at the time was studying a graduate program in New Jersey. He was my best friend in seminary. And I called him to tell him what I was thinking. And he said, well, Ben, I suggest you look into the Episcopal Church, because he had looked into it and found it and made a change. I didn't know that till I called him, but we had been separated for a while. And so I did then look into the Episcopal Church and found it quite a comfortable home, because the Methodist Church grew out of the Anglican Communion. And so a lot of the ritual forms that I was familiar with as a Methodist pastor were the same that were used in the Book of Common Prayer. And a lot of the other ways of doing things, even theology of baptism, for example, and when to become confirmed or to become a member of the church officially speaking. Those sort of things were common to the Episcopal Church. I had to learn some sacramental theology I had not learned in the Methodist seminary, and some other things, the history of the Church of England in a better, more than I had learned in seminary. But it seemed like a good place for me.
So where'd you go after Waynesboro?
After Waynesboro, we went to my friend's house in South Pittsburgh. He became by the time I left Waynesboro, he had become the pastor of an Episcopal congregation in South Pittsburgh. And when I determined that it was time to leave the Methodist Church, the district superintendent thought I should leave immediately. So that's what we did, and then the whole family had to find a place to go, and my friend invited us to stay in his home with his family. And we were there for a few months, and then we went to Sewanee, to the University of the South, so I could get some advanced studies in Episcopal theology. And we stayed on the mountain for a few months in one of their family housing units. And then the Bishop of Tennessee appointed me to be the pastor in charge of, although I was not yet ordained in the Episcopal Church, he appointed me to be the pastor in charge of Trinity Episcopal Church in Winchester, Tennessee, and also to have the responsibility for a little congregation called St. Agnes Church, Episcopal Church in Cowan. So that's where we went. The people in Winchester received us, and they didn't have a rectory, so they rented a house for us to live in, and we began life there. And we had I think we were there for 7 years. I already got to go and stay and finish high school at the University of the South at Sewanee Military Academy before we left the Winchester area, which was close to Sewanee.
Where did you go after that?
Oh, after that, well, let's see. I went to the church in Knoxville, Tennessee, called Church of the Good Shepherd. I succeeded, well, one of the previous pastors in that congregation, which was a fairly new congregation, one of the previous pastors had been a classmate of mine at Vanderbilt named Sanders, and his brother was one of my bishops in the Tennessee Conference, Bishop Bill Sanders. And so I was there a short time, and then I was called to the church in Louisville, and decided that that's where I should go, and then went to Trinity Episcopal, no, I'm sorry, not Trinity. In Louisville, I went to Emmanuel Episcopal Church on Southern Parkway near the Churchill Downs, and I pastored that congregation for 14 years before leaving, resigning that pastorate. And
Is that where you retired?
Actually, not really. I resigned there because I felt like the Lord wanted a charismatic Episcopal congregation in the Louisville area. And while I was pastor at that church, I had entered into the what was called the Charismatic Renewal, which was a renewal of the church that believed that all the gifts of the Holy Spirit were for this time as well as apostolic times. And as I began to study that, I thought, well, yes, why would the Lord give gifts that weren't for everyone? And so I entered into the Charismatic Renewal and came to the belief that a charismatic Episcopal congregation should be formed in the Louisville area. The bishop of my Louisville area diocese agreed with that. And actually there was a non-denominational congregation that had a pastor who had been reared by a Methodist father and a Roman Catholic mother, and who had gone into the Assemblies of God as an ordained pastor. And he had been in eastern Tennessee and come back to, eastern Kentucky, and come back to Louisville to start a congregation. And that congregation was well underway when he approached my bishop about bringing his congregation into the Episcopal Church. And the bishop said yes. And since I wasn't busy at that time, the bishop appointed me as the priest in charge. And so I had the privilege of working with Johnny Johnson and seeing that congregation become an Episcopal congregation, and seeing Johnny Johnson ordained as an Episcopal priest, at which time the bishop thought I should leave. And in the meantime, my first wife had gone to be with the Lord. Liz had gone, and the Lord had brought Dee into my life, and so we had married. And then Dee had a ministry that she had formed in Chicago. She's a native of Chicago, and she had formed a ministry after the Lord had transformed her life and really opened her understanding to how people can be healed of lifelong rejection and feelings of rejection, and other ways that she had studied with some of the most outstanding leaders in inner healing in the country at that time. And so after a number of months that I was looking for another Episcopal pastorate, I just asked the Lord if it'd be all right if I worked with Dee. And I thought the Lord said yes. So I joined her ministry, and rather than taking another congregation. And that was when I retired from the full-time pastorate as such.
Now that you've been here, how is this different than it was back then, the facilities?
Well, got more stained glass. It's beautiful. The stained glass was not here in that first 2 years. We were happy to have any glass at all. But the stained glass windows are beautiful. The church, of course, has enlarged. I guess it's probably twice as large, if not larger, in terms of square footage. I don't know the numbers. But, and the hospital that used to be next door seems to have disappeared. And now you have room for more parking up on the hill. And I see that you've been able to, you, Pastor Skip, have been able to stay more than 2 years, for which I'm grateful, and I'm sure the people are too.
Well, the average stay of a pastor at this church, including yours, is 5.5 years.
5.5.
That's very unusual.
That is, yes, because in the church I grew up in Nashville, East Nashville Methodist Church, the longest anyone was allowed to stay was 4 years. And one pastor, T.W. Mayhew, stayed 5 years. And that's just a symbol of how well he was regarded. And it may have connection with the fact that his parents lived in that, were members of that congregation, and his sister directed the choir there. But so there was a lot of, other support, perhaps, that he was able to go past the 4 years.
He stayed at Madison Street for 17 years.
How long?
17.
17 years. Now that's a long time in any Methodist appointment, isn't it? When I was at Belmont, Dr. John Rustin was there, and he stayed there. He hadn't been there that long when I got there, but he stayed there for 10 years. And that was a very long time. And that congregation was the largest one in the Methodist Conference, the Tennessee Methodist Conference at that time. That was really, I didn't know Pastor Mayhew had stayed so long. Well, that's great.
What questions do you have? Do you have any last thoughts, any last memories? Do you remember anything about Christmas or holidays while you were here?
Not especially. Nothing stands out. I remember being able to come back occasionally, since this was Liz's home. and since Artie came back to school here when he graduated from high school, and there were a lot of family members that I kept up with, I had opportunities to come back, and I always enjoyed being here and seeing how the church was continuing to do well, it seemed to me. And I feel like what I'm seeing in terms of the building and what I'm feeling in your spirit and in that of your, is she your secretary?
No, Nell's our historian.
Your historian? Oh, okay.
You don't want me as a secretary.
Okay. Well, what I feel in your spirit tells me that, of some good things that are happening in this congregation too. And I'm honored to have been a part of what has happened here, and blessed to have been able to take part of the congregation with me when I left.
But you let part of it come back to you.
Yes, I'm glad he's back too. Yeah.
Well, again, any last thoughts?
I believe that the Reformation that Martin Luther started in the 16th century went as far as he could take it. And it was a miracle that he was able to do what he did. But I don't think he got through. And I think that the rest of the priesthood of all believers is coming forth in this time in a way that it may have never come forth before, at least not since the times that the church was under persecution in the Roman Empire in the first 3 centuries. I think that we may be, the church generally speaking, not just this congregation or the Methodist Church in particular, but I think the whole body of Christ is coming to an understanding that the priesthood of believers means what it says, that all of us are priests unto God, and that we are to function in that way as ambassadors for Christ wherever our journey takes us, and whatever we have, whatever opportunities that God gives us. And that's what I see coming, and that thrills my heart. And that's about all I can say.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, my privilege. Thank you.